Romain, we are all yours.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. So I've been cut off before because I think I got some issues with internet, but hopefully it will be fine. I've reached to you through Steve, who talked to me about you, and he asked me whether I would do something about education, which I've been doing for a while. So I've been teaching over 15 years in France, in California, in Berkeley, and in Thailand. And I am normally a teacher and I hold a master's degree in education. But I returned to my country about 6 years ago after living abroad half of my life. And I went back to teaching in France with all the French education system, right? And what happened is that after teaching in America and teaching in Thailand, I find out that teaching in France was really much let's put it this way, I find the teaching languages was less concerned with helping students generally communicate and was more focused on having to memorize rules, pass exam, and fit into predefined molds. And then I couldn't find myself teaching this kind of thing. So for Steve, I made a little research a bit further. It's not a thesis, but it pointed out why I felt uncomfortable and why maybe there's an issue, I think, teaching languages throughout the world, not just in my country. So this is what the starting point. So what I did 4 years ago, that a shift, I stopped teaching and I am now working on digital communication, which is also about communicating, but I found it more meaningful nowadays than teaching in our countries. And I think in America, you also have some issues with education right now. And I think it's a worldwide thing where education and languages are not doing what they should be doing, but I'm going to get to that. And I'm going to get to the point why there's something a bit imbalance in when it takes to teaching languages. Okay, so my point is that communication by definition must be clear, engaging, and purposeful. So that's the case with my job today, which is with digital communication, but I believe it should also be the same thing with language education. And yet, it often doesn't do the trick when we're a teacher, when we're teaching, or when we're a student and we're learning. Languages is very specific, and it does not really get to the point to where we like to be bilingual or we like to be able to communicate. And instead, we spend a lot of time acquiring knowledge, skills, pass level, earn certificates, and fit into institutional or cultural molds. So there's something a bit imbalance in teaching, which is not just about acquiring languages, but it goes to different points depending of the system. And it's not necessary about talking to people or conversing with other people. So what I did first, which I think it's really talking a lot, is that I did some research about the etymologies of different words we're using in English, in French, in Celtic Breton, which is my mother tongue, and in Thai languages. And I think by studying etymologies of the vocabulary we're using in teaching languages, I think it's telling a lot about our background and where we're going to. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share a document with you. Hello. Document desktop. Okay. I just need to find the PDF. Okay, from roots. Okay, I just send you a document called From Roots to Word. It's a PDF, and it will help illustrate what I want to point out. Hello. I don't know if everybody got it.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, great.
Did you want me?
But maybe it might help you if you want to have a visual support, because it's about etymology, so it's a bit a bit complicated, and it's gonna go from English, French, Breton, and Thai. So I think you could open it and see a bit better what I mean. So to go back, etymology reveals how people think and express ideas. Like I got two native languages. One of them is French and the other one is Celtic. So Celtic from France. And there is a sentence that we say in Breton, which is Aguadec zo glace. And if we find about the etymology, it means that the forest is blue, okay? Which maybe is strange, weird in English, but it totally makes sense in Breton because it's not that much about the language, the word being blue. It's about the meaning behind that actually means natural color. And green, it's more like a man-made artificial color that people use. So anyways, it's just to mean that words carries meaning, whether we know it or we don't. So I selected a few words that are related to teaching languages and teaching in education. And I tried to compare the origin and the etymology. So if we take to speak, but we see that in English, it's a native word, right? It's come from the Germanic, and it's pretty much means to make a sound originally. Similarly to talk, it's the same thing. It's a native word. It hasn't been, taken from another culture. It's also an Anglo-Saxon word. When you get to the French, it's a little bit different because parler comes from the Christian Latin parabolare, which means also to speak, but more like preaching the speech. It's got more like some kind of Christian value to it. In my other language, Breton, we have two different words for that too, like in English. We got combs, which is a native word, and we got cogel, which comes from the French. And in Thai, we see that we say put, which is also a native word, right? So it's going to be meaningful as we're going to study the etymology, and we're going to find out something quite important. Okay, I took to communicate also, which is one of the main words we should be using when we think about languages and teaching languages. So when we talk about communicate in French, well, we can see that here it's no longer a native word, right? Should it be in English or in French? It's come from the Latin. So we borrowed that word from another one, whether we speak English or we speak French. In Breton, kemen is also a Latin word. Doesn't come from the same word as communicate in English or in French, but it also comes from the Latin. And in Thai, it's the same thing. It's not a native word, and the Thais borrowed it from the Sanskrit.
Hey,
So
Romain, would you like me to share the PDF while you present?
Sure. No, not
Okay,
everybody
yeah.
did it?
No, I think they did. I don't know if they would just help them visually right now to see it. I don't mind sharing it real
But
quick.
yes, if you could share it, I would like to. Yeah, thank you very much.
I would like to see it. I would like to be seeing it. It would help.
Yeah, you can put it on the screen, you mean now?
Yeah, you can allow him to there you go.
Perfect, yeah. Okay, so I'm back to language. So language and langue in French also come from the same word and from the Latin lingua. So one more time, the French and the English, they borrowed that word from another culture. So it's not a native word one more time. So talking and speaking comes from the native word in most of the languages, but language itself, which is a bit more abstract in concept, comes from the Latin again. In Breton, we say yes, which is the same as the Welsh iaith, and it's also a native word here, and is linked to the tribe and people, if we believe in the Irish roots. Although we don't really know the etymology, but it's not Latin, it's most likely a native word. And in Thai, we say pasa, which is from the Sanskrit, which means speech and language as well. But once more time, it's not a real Thai word. And it's also been borrowed. So here we can see that some vocabulary is native, some others has been taken from foreign languages. And we talk about education, and we talk about languages. So when we go down to education in French, same thing again, is from the Latin. In Breton, desk, it's also from the Latin, even it's not the same, totally the same origin, but it's from disco, I learned. And if we take the Thai, same problem again, it's come from the Sanskrit. So here in all languages, education, it's a word that's been, that came from foreign countries, foreign languages, not from the native people. And what's more, education, it's an abstract idea. It's not something really practical or concrete. It's something that we're gonna see later on. It's not a daily thing. So we go back to school, which is the basic, where we can learn and when we can teach. So school in English, école in French, school in Breton, all from the same Latin origin, coming from the Greek as well, which is supposed to be a pleasure, leisure at the beginning, which is maybe a lot of students might disagree with that nowadays, but that's the etymology of the word, a place where we can enjoy learning. When we take the Thai, Rongrian, it's also the same thing. It comes from the Sanskrit. It's not a native word. So school, whether we live in Thailand or in Europe, it's not a word that we've been using in our native language. Which lead to the professor, the teacher, professor in English, professor in French, also from the Latin. Then we got the Breton kelener, which is a native word, but there's some kind of meaning of holiness behind. It's linked with the trees, right? Which is, it's in Irish, in Welsh, or in Breton, the holiness of the word kelener, teacher, is there. And if we take the Thai, kru is from the Sanskrit guru, with the guru in English, which also carries that kind of holiness in it. And it's not a native word. Then we got lecturer, which we use at university, lecturer in English, which is from the Latin too, conférencier en français, which is come from the Latin. And in Breton, we got two ways to see it. We got the komzer, which is from the native language to comes, to speak. And we got predigener, which is from the Latin word, predico, which means to preach or to proclaim. And if we take the Thai, ajan, it's also from the Sanskrit. So apart from one word in Breton, everything else has also been taken from a foreign language and is not really used and coming from the native language. And then we got few last words, student, donc étudiant en français, studier et brezonec en breton, which is also a Latin word. Then pupil, donc pupil from the old French pupille, so it's an English word that came from the French, and we don't really use it anymore in French. Now we use élève, which is also from the Latin. And in Breton, we use coliat, adesker, which is all also from the Latin. After my Thai was not good enough to know exactly where it came from, but I am sure it's linked with Sanskrit. And then we get to learn, which in English is a native word and has some kind of Germanic origin. And in French, apprendre, which is from the Latin, and deski in Breton, so Celtic language, which is also from the Latin. Then to teach, also a native word in English, not a native word in French, and not a native word. It is a native word in Celtic, but it carries some kind of holy meaning to it. So enseigner in French, which is from the Vulgar Latin insignare, which means to indicate, and kelen, which is the same thing as kelener, which means teacher or teaching. And at last, to instruct. So we don't have that word in Breton. It means the same thing as to teach. But in English and French, we do have instruct and instruire, which is also from the Latin. So anyway, so what we can see from this table is that a bunch of words are from native language, and a few of them come from another one. It's been borrowed from the foreigners. So a lot from Latin for the French and the English, and a lot is coming from Sanskrit and Pali for the Thais. So what we can learn from this table is that beyond the obvious everyday words like speaking or to talk, which which has native roots for all languages, apart from French. All terms related to school and education, should it be in Thailand or should it be in America or in England or France, come from the Latin or the Sanskrit. So I got a question for everybody. Why is that? Steve, your microphone is off.
Yes.
Ah, voilà. Yeah, now we can hear you now.
Okay. You said why is it that the words for language come from the contact with other cultures?
But why most of the words linked to language and education are not native words? So yeah, why do they come from other cultures and other languages?
I guess because within your own culture, you're just speaking. And when you came in contact with other cultures, you had to learn what they were saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
The differentiation was necessary when you had contact with another culture.
Okay, so somebody got a different point, a different view over why there are so many words that are used every day in our language or all languages and are all coming from different foreign languages, which should we speak Thai, French, English, or whatever? Anybody? Okay, let's go back to a little bit of history.
David Schwambert has a comment.
Okay.
I was going to suggest, at least in the case of Latin, I'm not sure if this applies to the Sanskrit roots of Thai words, but I'm assuming that there was an imposition by the Roman Empire on different people who spoke dozens and dozens of different languages because there was a need to get the people of all of these conquered countries to communicate with each other. So it's more of an imposition onto other languages than a pragmatic, hey, let's be able to talk to our neighbor kind of thing.
Well, I'm sure it's something of that too, but there's also something else. If we take about the history a little bit, so Roma and Italian, they Christian, they become all Christians around the 4th century, more or less. And then the French followed very soon after that, 100 years later. And then it took 500 years to go up north, and ultimately around 1000, all Europe become Christians. And my question is, what language did Christians use to communicate in Europe?
Latin.
Yeah. So, and who was in charge of knowledge, and who was in charge of science, and who was in charge of education back then?
The Roman Church. The
church. So they brought that with us, and every time when we speak, when we educate, when we teach, when we learn, apart from the English, which you save a little bit of that, but at least for the French, we 100% using Latin, which is Christian Latin words in everyday life. And so when we want to teach, when we want to learn, when we want to create a program, within the words we're using, we carry that Christian background, and most likely the way of doing things is also coming from there. And that's why it's so important to understand the words, because when we understand the words, we understand where we're coming from and how we shape ideas and how we're going to mold our education system and language teaching.
And in Thailand, Romain, it was because of Buddhism and Hinduism.
Exactly, yeah. In Thailand, it's the same thing, but because of Buddhism. So the Buddhists brought the Sanskrit with them, but it got exactly the same effect as the church in Europe. And so wherever we are, whatever we believe, whatever religion we have or not, because of our past and because we are human beings, we all gonna have, most likely, I'm sure if we study other languages, we're gonna carry those words from a dominant culture or dominant religion that once settled in our countries, and we're gonna be teaching with that ideas, whether conscious or unconscious.
So Romain, since Latin was such a prominent language from the church, in the Roman Empire, and it was the language that people spoke. It has long since become known as a dead language. People no longer use it.
True.
With one exception, of course, there's Pig Latin. We still speak Pig Latin, but we're not talking about Pig Latin. We're talking about the Latin. So what caused it to die out, and why didn't the religion die out with the language?
Well, I think if the religion died out with the language, I think even with the our best will of trying to do our best in terms of education and teaching languages, we do have that 2,000 years or 1,500 years of history of powerful, meaningful Christian words behind, which we use every day, but we don't really pay attention when we say professor, we're actually talking about somebody who's professing. So which is totally, Latin is no longer here, the Latin died out. But since it was the lingua franca of people for communicating through Europe, and since religion was in charge of the state, in charge of everybody's life, I mean, until not too long ago, what could we do without the religion? The religion was appointing kings. They were deciding who was living and not, sometimes doing justice, controlling the knowledge. They were omnipotent. And even though, like me, I'm from a Catholic, not a Catholic, but I mean a laïc country, so normally we should not have any religion. We carry that background with us, and even if we don't believe in it, every day when we say professor, we actually speak Christian Latin. When we say school, even though it's coming from the Greek and the philosopher, it's not the meaning we use. It's really the Latin, the Christian Latin word, schole, which is more like a place to study and not really a place of leisure. And I think that's a problem when we teach languages, because on one side we can see that speaking and talking is really vulgar, it's vernacular, it's something from the country, from everyday life, is really practical. But everything which carries a more abstract concept, like education, teaching, it comes from another language, so more or less the Christians, pretty much. So we're trying to do something which carries a dual nature. We got the people, the practical language, the language is meant for communicating. And on the other hand, we got the some kind of powerful, sacred and religiously abstract ideas of school and education. And I think the main problem we have teaching languages is that because we carry both ideas of, on one side, it's really academic and almost religious, and on the other side, it's something more practical, and we don't really know what side to choose. And a lot of time we lose the student because most of them, they just want the practical aspect of it. They don't want to learn about grammar. They don't really care about it. And even if I don't conjugate properly, everybody gonna understand me. If I say, me go Thailand tomorrow, okay, the grammar is not great. In English is not good, but can I communicate like that? Yeah, there's no problems. And I think start knowing that to have a good education system that teaches languages in an efficient way, we should be aware of those meaningful ideas behind and how we use them. And we should be aware that there's a dual nature to teaching languages, because teaching is sacred and holy and religious, but languages, it's something more to the people. So it doesn't really align together. So, and I think that's why a lot of,
Man, I always felt like communication is what I'm trying to do, right? I don't care if you conjugate the verb properly, right? I mean, if I could learn Thai words, just, toilet and the different words that are necessary, you don't need all the stuff in the middle. And when you're dealing with Thai students, they're really good at conjugating and grammar and really bad at communicating.
And same for the French, we're really good in grammar. And I think you say something interesting, which is we don't need all the thing in the middle, which is a little bit like the religion. I mean, it's something personal that we don't really need in the middle. It should be something that, we don't need to have it in front of everyone and pulling people apart. It's something personal. And language should be the same way. You should be using it for communicating, and making mistakes should be a part of it. Not being perfect should be a part of it. And actually, I even got an example when I came back to my country after 20 years. They actually changed the law regarding the grammar. So, which is super weird because when I was a kid, the teacher used to hit me when I will, you don't have that in English, but you know, we got feminine and masculine words, right? So back in the days, we had feminine words that could only be feminine, and we had masculine words that could only be masculine. And they changed the law a few years ago, saying that okay, to be equal, now we can feminize some words that used to be masculine. But it's something for which I got hit when I was a kid because we had to be perfect. And that's where it's a bit like religion. It's not really useful, but it's very much there.
Yeah, when I was taking French, I asked the teacher why tableau, table, was female, right? And she said to me, "Vous êtes idiot, monsieur." She called me an idiot for even asking the question.
Yeah, and nobody knows nowadays why, except from some exception. Like I know if you say a mayor, we didn't have a feminine word for mayor because in the history, the mayors were all men, like writers and stuff like that. So there's that part that sort of makes sense because of our history. But there's also another part which is very much rooted in Indo-European languages, and it's linked with whatever is alive and whatever is not alive. So usually what was feminine was something not alive. So I don't know if it's really good for feminism, but the language took it like that and evolved, changed to what it is in French with feminine and masculine. So table is feminine because it's wood and it's sort of a dead material. And
Tree,
a dog,
tree would be masculine. Tree would be masculine.
a tree, yeah. Un arbre
It's
is masculine. Yeah. So it's there's something linked to that. It's not true for everything because we also had words coming from the Franks and the Germans, and we got Celtic words and other words. So the rules doesn't apply for everything, but as a rule of thumb, it's pretty much what it is.
I want to comment about the divisions that happened in the Roman Empire. You know, that there kind of first went to east and west, and then the Roman Western Empire pretty much collapsed, and they were many tribes, and though most of them eventually became Christianized,
Yeah.
but still they had a lot of division. There are different kingdoms, and even in one country, what is now one country, France, from what I've read, then a few hundred years ago, person in southwest France could not understand the French spoke much
No,
in
like
the northeast part of France. They're speaking
yeah,
what they all consider French, but different versions. Same thing in Spain and so forth. And Portuguese only became a separate language because it became separate from Spain. But otherwise, all the forces of Spain, they're under Spain, that stayed Spain. Eventually, someone said, "This is Spanish. What you're speaking is not Spanish. You're not supposed to speak that anymore." I mean, for many centuries, there's no one forcing anyone to speak a common language. It became Latin became the language of the elitists who were educated. But when they're giving sermons, the educated priests gradually they're speaking Latin to people who could no longer understand what the priest was saying.
No, totally true. And it's like me, my father is from Brittany, so I'm from the western part of France, so we speak Celtic, but my mother is from Alsace, which is the eastern part of France, and they speak German. And if we take the both extreme from the west and the east, one is Celtic and speak Celtic, and the other one is German and speak German. And we couldn't understand each other's, but nowadays everybody speaks French, and it all become, and everybody's carrying what you said, the roots from the elites, from the nobles, from everything. And it's the same thing in English too. I mean, the funny thing in English, when the French Norman conquered England in 1066, they brought with them, they carried with them a lot of words that really talks a lot about the meaning in English. Like, why do you say pig in English when you talk about an animal? And why do you say pork when you eat it? Why do you say cow and then beef, or sheep and then mutton? Right? And it's telling a lot about the history, and it's telling a lot about how people think. So back in the days, the peasant would take care of the animals, and the French nobles would eat them. And then it stayed in the language. And for the French, it's a bit the same thing with education. And 85% of everything in French life.
Well, I also find it curious that a lot of times in English, in American English, we say when someone's using a swear word, they say, "Excuse my French," and then they use most an Anglo-Saxon term. I'm saying, what the
Well,
heck?
the French are supposed to be pretty rude, and it is a fact because I used to be a preschool teacher in Berkeley for K3. And I remember back then I learned all those English lullaby, and all of these English lullabies very very sweet. They're full of like I like the flowers going down the hill and everything like that. Whereas when we think about the French lullabies, it's all about dying, killing, and I think it goes with the French used to be very cruel, raw, and I know nowadays French sounds like a bit better, but I think back then when the French invaded England, I mean, it's coming from the history too, where we know the French used to love perfume and over showers and stuff like that. And I mean, there's a part of truth in everything we speak and every proverb. So when in English I put on my French, it surely means that most of the French were not super polite at the time. And when we hear two French lullabies, they're not especially. I got kids now, and I got a hard time to teach them French lullabies because they're not cute. They're just a bit gross, a bit disgusting. And so I think it's a part of the language and the culture we also carry with us. But when we speak it every day, we don't pay attention. We only pay attention when we go see somewhere else.
I don't want to get too far ahead of you, but language isn't always just verbal. It's not oral. There's also the French are credited with starting a sign language, which began with gestures, which were very effective at actual communication for the deaf who could not hear or maybe speak anything. So maybe you'll address that. So I want you to get back into your talk, unless you want to continue with the Q&A. We can do that, because I've got a lot of questions that I'm sure a lot of people do. But I'd like you to get back on track with your presentation.
Yeah, gesture and sign language. I think this one, Steve will be the best to be able to talk about it, because that's more like in society. I think, Steve, if you could say something about that, because that's really your field.
Well, I've been able to survive here for 10 years speaking almost no Thai, and most people don't speak English. But in sociology, we've always said that communication, 60% of communication is nonverbal. And I've really found that to be true here. I can make myself understood without using, a real language. And, by pantomime and different things. And you can tell when they understand, and then you can move on to the next point. So
that's one of the things, Lance, I think you're making a good point, because that's one of the things that I think that language and effective communication is all about. It's reconciliation. And you just recognize the reconciliation was, oh yeah, we got it. We nod our heads and we shake hands, or we do it. We have some acknowledgement of understanding each other, which is an effort at reconciliation. Romain, would you agree that communication, at least effective communication, seeks reconciliation?
Yeah, when I worked with Steve back then, we talked a lot about that, and it does takes. It's a big part of communicating, the non-verbal communication, and it's something that is totally avoided from any language manual. And I got a good example of a mistake I've made as a teacher a long time ago. So I had like grown-up Thai students who learned French with me for a year, and their French become pretty good and everything. And after a year, they decided to go to Paris for a trip and try their French, right? So they left for a month and came back. And they talked to me and they're like, okay, Romain, I said, we learned French with you, but we went there and we understood nothing. He said, people are not speaking the way they should be, and they're making all those weird noise and gesture like they do. And they say, what the hell does it mean? And we do have all those things that we do that are non-verbal, but we use every day, like the French, which means I don't know pretty much. But I totally forgot that we do that. I mean, language is one way to communicate, but actually it's not everything. Right? And if they had basic French skills, but yet they could not really communicate because they didn't have all that gesture and all the things that made the language alive pretty much. And that's where I agree with Steve. It's to be able to to find some kind of conciliation. It goes beyond just the words, and we have to understand also the meaning of the body and the hands and the weird sound people can make. I know in England, yeah.
I was just to say, also in teaching American English to Thai people, I recognize that you need to teach idioms. You can learn perfect English and not be able to communicate because much of what we say are idioms. They're the English words, but the context needs to be understood. And Americans, a lot of the idioms that we use, we take from movies and TV shows and other parts of our culture. And so when I teach English, I always, every day, every class, I introduce them to new idioms. And then they'll watch, like they could watch a movie and 70% of the movie they could understand, but 30% they have no idea what's going on because those are idioms. And I'm not sure that the British use as many idioms as Americans use, but it's really, really a part of our language that we just take for granted. You know, we'll speak and there'll be idioms in there, and you can see the people looking like, what the hell is he talking about, right? I know the words, but I don't know what they mean in that context, right?
Does the word idiom come from the French, like raining cats and dogs?
I'm sure idioms is from the Latin again, but yeah, we got raining cats and dogs. I remember one day when I went to England, I talked about there is no fire on the lake, and everybody looked at me like, what the hell? And for the French, it totally made sense to translate there is no fire on the lake because it's a French idiom, but it's not an English one. So I find out that to say no rush was more meaningful when there is no fire on the lake. But yes, Steve is right too. Every language has got lots of idioms. Should we be living in Britain or in America? I remember a YouTube video about an American girl who talked about Americanish and English, because in her head, she really split English from American English because the idioms are very different.
Fred.
I was saying, so many idioms come from centuries ago where they might have made sense back then, but they somehow stayed in the language. And now in modern days, we use them, but we don't really know the origins of them, where they made some sort of sense.
Right, but all they are is abbreviations. You know, in English, we use so many abbreviations to make it shorter. And an idiom is a really good abbreviation because we can say 3 words and it means a paragraph or a page, right? But if everybody's familiar with the idiom, you cut through the chase, right? Real quick.
All right, Romain, what else you got?
What Steve pointed out is that, yeah, we do have also, I mean, when we teach languages, all those things are totally forgotten from books. Idioms, a little bit less. Gesture, totally forgotten. Nobody talks about it. Idioms, it's a little bit there, but it's not a big part. And Steve is right when it says communication, it's a lot of idioms as well. And we should emphasize in that too, because I remember when I went to London after studying English for 9 years in my country, we went for a field trip with the school, went to London. So it's some kind of clear, clean English. It's not really a complicated English like the one from Wales or Manchester. And I remember being there in London after studying English for 9 years and thinking to myself, what the hell? I do not understand anything. And I couldn't understand anything because people got a way they got idioms, like what Steve said. What, like you said, you got gesture and body language as well, but you also have different accents. And all that together, it's not taught in the book in language school.
Australia is worse. On top of that, in Australia, you have words that are created, that Australians have created. I mean, it's like a completely different language.
Yeah, no. It's and all those things, I think, and it's alive. So it might be alive for a few years, and then it's gonna die out in a few others. I got a much younger brother who's 20 years younger. And when I returned to my country 6 years ago, he talked to me in French and he said something which I could not understand in my home language because it's not a word that existed 20 years ago. And I had no clue about what he talked about. So we cannot rely on 19th century languages and methodology to teach a language, which is what the French do. We use like the method from 100 years ago, and we think it's going to be okay and it's going to work. And then the students learn it and they go in the home country and they find out they can understand nothing and they cannot communicate. And that's a big issue, I think, when it gets to languages. Yeah.
Well, there's lingo as well, which is very different from proper language, right? And as generations evolve, they create their own lingo. It used to be far out man was something that we didn't quite understand. Now we have things like jizz and other, in English at least, other words that the Gen Z generation uses regularly that somebody like me, if I didn't read about it, I would not understand it.
Yeah, it's exactly true. You got this kind of, my daughters do the same in French and in English, and sometimes I got no clue about what they're talking about. And I got a master's degree in languages, and I'm like, what is that? And they use like abbreviation, acronyms, they use all kind of stuff. And I know, for an example too, when I went to America the first time, I was in Oakland, California. And there's one of the guy who told me duh. And I was like, duh, I thought it was the D-U-H. And the guy said, no, it says the D-A. And I was like, the D-A. I said, what is D-A? D-A. I tried to look through all my vocabulary background and I had nothing D-A. And I found out it was T-H-E, but just the slang word. So you add up slang to it. And it's, for him, it was totally normal to say the D-A. So maybe for every American it is. But for a foreign student who learned English, it was just very weird and I couldn't understand him. And we had that kind of lack of communication for a short time, because it's same thing. When I was a kid at school, we teach you Christian tags. I've been to England, isn't it? And blah, 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 blah. And I remember the French focusing a lot on that grammar, little stuff like that. And when you go to America, well, you just find out that nobody used that really. Everybody just put right at the end, and which is much easier. Just put right. Then you don't have to spend like 6 months of learning question tags at school. You just say, you agree, right? You just put right, and then it's easy for everybody. But the French keep on talking to some kind of pure language, which doesn't make much sense nowadays. That's a big issue too.
I was thinking about slang, or particular subcultures would develop their own slang and so forth, which they intend for outsiders not to understand. Yeah. And eventually it may seep out into the wider culture, but with original intent was to completely befuddle anyone who is not within that subgroup.
Yeah, it's true that the intent originally is to not be understood by others, but or it's I know I heard a lot of ax in America for ask, where the K and the S was inversed a little bit and stuff like that. So I don't know if sometimes maybe there's an intent, and then sometimes it's maybe a mix of origin or lack of education. If I don't know, some families came from America and some others from French, and then they had to speak English, and then they sort of mixed up the language. I know when I was in England, I heard in America, people said petite, which was really funny because in England, when I was living in Britain, nobody would use petite. And it's a bit similar to the French word petite, but not quite. So it's, even though it's English, it's not quite the same way. Not everybody got the same meaning. When I was in California, people say homie, and my English friend couldn't understand anything. And a lot of my American friends understood it, but if they were not from California, they will not use it every day. So it's pretty rich. And I think we're lacking, and it's a big problem. And it's what we said, focusing too much on grammar doesn't make any sense because it's one side of the language. And it's not it can change, it will change. It's not stuck to one country. I mean, in America, you can say through TH-R-U, and in England it's TH-R-O-U-G-H. And I mean, at the end, it doesn't really matter if you can just communicate and let the message go through and exchange ideas with people. I think that should be the meaning of language education, teaching languages, and not what we do. But my point behind is also beyond the fact that there's a dual meaning in education and languages. There's also intent, and it always makes me think of the Pink Floyd song "We Don't Need No Education." No force control. And I think behind there is an intention to manipulate people's mind and people's thoughts. And we can see nowadays with America, I think the fact that there's no, I don't know if it's true. Is it true you got no more Ministry of Education?
Is it true what?
That you have no more Ministry of Education, and it's only something that's
Trump
now
is
the
trying to
state
get
is.
rid of it.
Department
Trump
of
is-
Education he's referring to.
Yeah, the Department of Education.
Yeah, Trump wants to get rid of it.
So this one is really gone. You don't have it anymore, right?
Not yet, but
Not
it's on
yet, but it's on, Trump wants it to be on the way out.
Okay, so that means the states will be in charge of the education, or the city, or the counties, or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so that means that will make the language and education even more diverse, because then every state will decide that, okay, in our state is like this, and in California is like that, and in Florida we're gonna think like that, and if you got a super Christian state, they're gonna say, okay, we're gonna teach the dinosaur were here 6,000 years ago, and then it can end up a bit like that, technically, theoretically, right?
Yes.
Great, more division.
And they'll be teaching that white people are the superior type of humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, that's sadly how that's the meaning behind education. Sadly, it does have a double meaning too, and I think it goes back to the same root because it's Christians. The word vocabulary is behind, and yeah, people can manipulate with education. And I can see in my country when I went back to teach 6 years ago, what came from the government. It really led the students to learn not much and to be not really that good. And I was wondering whether we had to teach this way because the government was incompetent, or whether it was an intention from the government to uneducate students in general, and not, because the more education you have, the more you should be free to think and free to think over things and say no. But if people are not educated, they most likely going to say yes and follow.
Yeah, I think it becomes propaganda. I mean, here I taught Thai history here, and the Thai history textbook ends about 300 years ago. They don't teach anything about modern Thai history, right? Because you would question the politics, you would question the king, right? So they go back to the time when the king was like a mythological hero, and kids know a lot about 17th century or 16th century Thai politics, but they had no idea that Thailand was on the side of the Japanese in World War II, right? They don't know that because it's not taught to them, right? It's very interesting. And American education is going the same way. I mean, Florida, you're not going to be able to teach about slavery anymore, or you're going to be taught that slaves volunteered to become slaves, right? I mean, it's a ridiculous idea, but that's what's happening. And getting rid of the national education structure is crucial to doing that in America.
Well, also it seems like there's an effort to do away with teaching students how to think, how to think clearly and rationalize, or to ponder the question, but more to rote memorization.
Yes,
which
and we know that in the atheist world that the more you think, the less religious you're going to be. So of course the religious don't want you thinking; they want you just memorizing, right? Memorizing.
The facts as they give it to you, or the quote unquote facts.
Romain, is it true that English is the most commonly spoken language in the world?
Well, I think with Arabic and Chinese, most likely. After I worked for the Alliance Française in Thailand and everything, and I did do a thesis in linguistic, and I calculated an interesting thing back then, which was calculating how many forms, how many ways you needed in French to conjugate one verb, and how many ways you had in English to conjugate the very same verb, right? And let's say for the verb to go, well, in English, you will have on average 20 different ways to conjugate it, whereas in French, you will have 80. which make it much more complicated to learn because if you want to follow the rules and get and pass your exam and get a good grade, you have to learn everything about grammar. And when in English you got 20 rules that apply, you got 80 in French. Well, I think if you're not stupid, you're gonna choose English because it's easier to learn, it's easier to pass because you got less things to learn. Whereas if you do French or Spanish, well, you got much more rules. And I remember my wife is not French, and when she learned French, she said, okay, in French, my, it's masculine, right? And I said, yeah. Address, but same thing as in English, it's feminine, right? And I said, yeah. And then she said, why do you say mon adresse, which is masculine, feminine? In French, it totally doesn't make sense. And as of today, I do not have an answer except from the part that it sounds more beautiful. No, normally, we should say ma adresse to be correct in grammar, but we don't. So English is taking over.
And your experience in the different cultures that you taught, the different languages that you've taught, how different is it in the countries that you've taught in versus America regarding the number of people who learn a second language? Do you find that Americans make an effort at learning a second language, or do you find that they don't need to because English is spoken pretty much, a lot of places around the globe? And for people in France and people in other countries, they need to learn English in another language. How do you address that, if you would?
I think English nowadays is what used to be Latin back then. And in 2,000 years from now, people's mind gonna be twisted as much as with English as the French are with Latin nowadays, because all the movies come from America. I don't know, I mean, not all, but most of them. So if you want to hear English, you're gonna hear American English. The video games, most of them are in American English. So if you want to play with people in French, it's gonna be American English. In terms of power and everything, it's English. Computer skills, everything about coding is in English. So it will definitively affect the language for 1,000 years as much as Latin did. And perhaps French and other languages maybe will not disappear, but it will not be as strong as English because it just has become the lingua franca. And to answer the question, do American English has or good at speaking other languages? As I would say, it depends. I mean, I've seen a lot of people from Hispanic origin that could totally switch from Spanish and American English within seconds in California, or Chinese American who could totally speak Chinese. Even I got a friend who was in California for 8 generations, and he was of Chinese descent, and his family, we could still speak Chinese. So I think it depends the family's origin and how much mix they are. If I talk about like white American, I didn't meet a lot of people who could speak another language. More colorful people were more likely to speak another language when I was there, but it is just my observation. After the will, I think everybody wants to learn another language, but I guess it's just not that useful for American to speak another language, so people don't really focus too much on that. It's more like this one, maybe learning languages in America, it's more like a leisure than the practical things, because you don't need to speak another language to do business, pretty much.
The problem in America is when they teach another language. Here we have kindergartners learning English. In America, you can't even take another language until 7th grade. So by the time you're able to take another language, your brain is less likely to learn it, right? I mean, it's completely crazy when you think about it. What they do here is much, much better. Kids are learning language when the brain is very easy to manipulate and learn, and it becomes a game. When I first met Romain's family, his little girls spoke 4 languages, depending who was speaking to them, right? If you spoke to them in French, they responded in French. If you spoke to them in Thai, they responded in Thai and in English, without any difficulty. I mean, their brain just one to the other. And we don't even begin teaching until the brain is much, much less plastic. until the rules are part of your brain. You know, part of the reason it's hard to learn a language when you're old is that your brain is fixed with the language that you learned. And so everything has to be interpreted through those rules, which is why I asked that teacher why it was female, right? Because my brain didn't understand what, whereas a French kid would just, it's female, there's no question, right? So the plasticity of the brain, people ask me all the time why I don't know Thai. And, you know, my brain, every day I learn Thai words and they go in one ear and out the other. They don't stick in the middle.
All right. If you have a question for Romain, this is a good time to raise your hand. Jeanette, you've got a question.
Yeah, when we were talking, can y'all understand me okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. When we were talking about the religious components to language, you know, for the longest time, the churches did not want the Bible printed because they didn't want the and they didn't want people to learn how to read because they didn't want people to be able to read the Bible and come up with their own interpretations. And I find that whole, but the beginning part of your conversation extremely fascinating, because I'm not real sure what the time period was when you were taught. What it took forever for them to be able to print the Bible. It's crazy because the people in power don't want the mass to be able to think for themselves. That's the biggest problem with language. Is it's a corrupt system from the top down. It's a way of control. And I guess I kind of wanted your opinion on when, not maybe your opinion, that's not the right word, but your findings when it became, which countries promoted education first?
Yeah, Hayden, I think you got a good point. And for that, I went to get some quotes from just very basically from Greek philosopher and from Buddha. And I just find them that they point out exactly the same issues as today, which means today, the problem we have with education and teaching languages, which is related to making people free. Then if you make them free, then they're less religious, they're less likely to obey, and they're more likely to interpret different things. And if I take Socrates, so 2,500 years ago, more or less, he said education is the kindling of the flame, not the filling of the vessel. So it already says that 2,000 years ago and up, we had exactly the same questions as today. I got a couple. Socrates said too, I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. And same thing again, it's 2,500 years ago, and 2,500 years later, we still have the same problem, because on one hand, education is a tool, and it's a powerful tool to mold people. And on the other hand, it's also a way to free oneself, to interpret the way they want and everything. And I think everywhere in the world, we got to a point where I think education was more turned towards giving freedom to people to think for themselves. And I think nowadays is going back to an old ways, which is to use education and teaching languages not so much for educating the mind or for giving skills, but yeah, to manipulate. And then the less people are educated, then the more we can manipulate them. And it's an ongoing problem. And I think for what regards us nowadays, it's really coming from the fact that languages is something free, right? It's something that we use every day, whereas education, it's something religious. Should we be Christian nowadays, or for the Greek 2,500 years ago, so pagan? And it's coming back all the time, because it's just the nature of education and the nature of languages. And I think 2,000 years from now, there will be still the same issues. how to use education in a good way, and not to use it as a tool for personal power, growth, or whatever. And I don't really have an answer, except that apart from being aware of it, we cannot really do much about it.
Romain,
It's so sad. It's just so incredibly sad the way, especially here in the United States right now. So, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Romain, do you know how many languages there are in the world?
I think I can't remember, but there are more than, I think it's the number of languages dying every year is huge. I don't have the numbers in head, but it's between 1 to 50 languages dying every year, something like that. I mean, my own native language, Breton, is about to die too. It's some kind of remain of the old Celtic language, and I don't know, in few generations, I'm not sure it's going to be there anymore. My daughter still speak Breton, but it's not possible to go to Brittany and speak Breton everywhere. So that's why I think at one point there would be English, Chinese, and people just want to make their life easier too. And like for what regards English, it's the language of technology, it's the language of the media. It's simple to learn. The rules are not very strict. It's not like the French or the Latin countries where we have to use really strict grammar rules, which do not make sense all the time too. It's a bit like the culture. The English language is more straightforward, whereas the French language is like the French culture. It goes around and it goes nowhere. So because we got a country, maybe the French will not die, but definitively English is the lingua franca, the franca lingua, sorry. And it's a language that will take over, which is taking over already, unless something happens with English, and then another language will take over.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the most difficult language? You keep referring to Chinese, but there are several Chinese different dialects. And so what, in your studies, what is the most difficult language?
Oh, to me, knowing French, English, Celtic, Thai, and a bit Chinese too, because my daughters are learning Chinese at school. I'd say the writing is definitively Chinese because you have to memorize so many characters. But in terms of speaking is definitively French. And I think one of the problem too is that I don't think English is something that there's no English department in the government in America or in England. But in French, we do have a French department, which is controlled by the government. So the positive things about it is that if I read an 800 years old book, a French book, I will understand more or less what it means, even it's 800 years old, because the grammar is more or less there, the vocabulary, the etymology, the spelling is pretty much there. So I can understand it. But the downfall is that when we speak, it doesn't match what we write. I'm gonna write just I don't know, I'm just gonna write a French thing here on the chat. Well, I think everybody will understand je ne sais pas, which everybody learned at school, which means I don't know. So that's the way to write it. But when a French gonna speak, he's never gonna say je ne sais pas. He's gonna say sais pas, 2 syllables instead of je ne sais pas, 4 syllables. And the je disappeared, and we got a sh. The ne disappeared, and we got nothing. And then the se becomes sh too with the je, and it's like saying I don't know. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing as I don't know. Yeah, je sais pas. But except that you can write it in English, but in French we can't. We have to write je ne sais pas. I don't know how to write je sais pas. Like in English, I don't know. We're not allowed to. And I think that's a big difference between both countries, is that we control the language from the higher up. And that makes it very complicated. When I got my students, I got one of my friends was a French teacher, and she was teaching subjunctive to her students. And she came back to me crying during recess, and she said, "Oh, I'm tired. I was teaching them subjunctive, and they all laughed. They thought I was making a joke." And she couldn't teach it because they would not believe that that's in the grammar, because nobody's using it nowadays. But it's in the book, so we have to teach.
I was thinking of, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the movie The Life of Brian. by Monty Python. And there's a scene where some Jewish rebels, they're writing graffiti. And John Cleese, playing a Roman imperialist, he sees it as he's lecturing them on the proper Latin that they should be using for the graffiti.
Oh.
In fact, he's more mad about them using improper Latin than the graffiti itself.
Yeah, I think it's a good analogy.
Wow. You know, we talk about the ability to communicate, and you want it to be engaging and you want it to be purposeful. But in order to communicate effectively, we also have to be heard. Free speech is worthless if nobody hears you. You could be screaming everything that's beautiful and wonderful and the secrets to everything in a closet, but if nobody hears you, what good is it? You need the tech, and nowadays we need the technology to be heard. For example, we're using Zoom right now so that we can hear what you have to say. So my question, and this is a question to the room, but Romain, maybe you can start it, but I'd like everybody to give a shot at answering this. If you could communicate in a language that everybody in the world could hear and understand, what would you tell them?
Well, I think it's Janet before who talked about interpretation, and I think it's very difficult because everybody can understand or can interpret what you're saying in different ways, even different from what you want to mean.
But I'm suggesting, though, that we get past that barrier.
Oh, okay.
We're past that barrier. We understand the barrier that exists today, and there's many more barriers than that. Technology is one of them. If you could get past the barriers and everybody could understand you, what would you tell them?
Ken, to understand your question, I think you need to and Romain might be able to deal with this, the amount of culture that's tied to language. So if you made a statement like that to the world, many people wouldn't understand, even though they understand the language, because culture is very much tied to language.
No,
you know what I mean? When I came here, there were people talking about getting rid of the Thai language. There's only 60 million Thai people. It would be much better to teach every Thai kid English. They would be much better in the world.
Let me
But
preface
the
this.
language, the Thai language is very much tied to Thai culture.
Well, yeah, I understand all of that. I'm offering a hypothetical situation here. I understand the barriers. We've talked about the barriers. We've talked about the cultures. We've talked about the limitations of language. But if you could communicate, and this is very fascinating to me, that I've asked this now 3 times, and there's roadblocks here. Because we're saying, oh, we can't do that because, but I'm going to repeat the question in a hypothetical format. What if you could transgress all of the boundaries that language and communication present? What would this room as individuals say to the world? Anybody? Wendell, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I would encourage and invite many human beings to think logically, because it's what you call a mathematical based thing, if you will. Because even though do, dos, tu would be phonetically different, it's the same amount no matter what. So it just takes a little bit of translation. It means this is like 2 centimeters, 2 millimeters. We still use ounces in the empire. I'm sorry. But then you would know it's not ounces that you have to utilize, it's centimeters. That's when you utilize logic, as opposed to, hey, what are these people, speaking about? And then we would communicate and say, hey, let's see where we meet, like on the Fahrenheit, Celsius, Kelvin scale, whichever one is 0, you could, say, hey, let's sync them up, and, we could get better from there. It's not like, oh, it's absolute zero is this, and are you using the Kelvin? Are you using the Celsius? Are you using the Fahrenheit? Are you using, right? If only we would start to think logically, we could decipher a lot of stuff instead of people. And we were talking about gestures and stuff like that. Gestures mean different things in different cultures and different parts of the planet. It's a wonderful thing. The communication, the phonetics, it. Somebody might say, "Hey, did you just say something?" I remember a former coworker. She said, "Did you call me fat?" Because I think I said good afternoon or something, and she thought I said gordo somewhere in my greeting. And I'm like, and another coworker said, "No, no, no, he's not like that." From observing me that I'm not, and I didn't even know gordo meant fat before then. To even say that about anybody. So yeah, I failed Spanish 3 times in high school, even though my dad got me the records, the vinyl records to conjugate verbs. Anyway, so logic would be the thing to help us all out, because, like I said, mathematics is not what my math is going to be. It's what logic is. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Wendell. Anybody else want to take a shot at answering? If you could break down all of the barriers and the cultural differences and the language issues, and speak to the world, would you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think it's something between Wendell, logic, and being open. I think something in between. I'm not sure we got a word for it, but yeah, I think if you start with being logic, I think it will be easier communicating. And then, as says Steve on the chat, even logic is different in different culture. It's true too. So you add a little bit of open-minded to it, and I think it makes the mixed. But well, that will need to be taught from at early age, I think.
Thank you, Romain. I appreciate it. Anybody else? Anybody else want to take a shot at?
It's your turn, Ken. What would you say?
I would say things like, "Get off my foot." You're standing on my, or I would say something like, maybe be kinder than you were yesterday. It sounds silly, and it sounds naive, and it sounds like it's just ridiculous to say something like that, because we have people, throwing bombs at Ukraine, and we got the Gaza stuff, and you can't go to these mad people and say, just be kinder. You can't, and have them hear you and understand it, which speaks to the whole problem of communication. How do you get somebody to understand what you really want them to do and then move them into action?
One thing is, how do we get people to empathize, to accept that people are different, and to just accept the different points of view, and to not think, oh, that person's different from me, so I got to kill him. Or
I think that's the point, Fred. You're absolutely right. That we need to teach people that other people's culture is just as important as ours, and that people are people, and it's an interesting rainbow out there. But we don't do that because of politics, right? So we are better than them. We don't want to understand them. They need to be more like us, right? That's certainly the American attitude.
So what? Right.
I think.
All right. Anybody else want to take a shot at?
Yeah, just one thing.
World.
Well, I'll say one, Ken. What I would say is that discipline determines destiny, because right now that's what I'd say. I'm not saying that at all times that's what I'd pick to say, but right now that's what I'd pick to say, because I tell myself that just about every morning when I'm feeling lazy and don't feel like getting out of bed to go to the gym. That discipline determines destiny. Desire doesn't determine destiny, because I could lay in bed all morning dreaming about looking a certain way or being in a certain shape. But unless I actually get up and go to the gym and do what I got to do to get that way, it won't happen. So that's what I'd say, that discipline determines destiny.
Okay.
That's a very Buddhist view, I think.
Thank you. I'm gonna say thank you. That was a compliment.
All right. Well, we're running out of time now. We've got just a few minutes. And in our last remaining minutes, I want to remind everybody that we are offering scholarships. And I want you to go to the First Coast Free Thought Society website, the /scholarship, our scholarship tab. And if you know a student who's interested in getting a scholarship, we're offering 2 $1,000 scholarships. Please encourage them to make the application. It's a simple application. I want everybody to have every opportunity to apply. And I also want to remind you that we're going to meet again at Enz's in Jacksonville, Florida. It's in a fine Italian restaurant. No finer food for free thought than you can get than at Enz's. I'll be there. I hope to see all of you. And please RSVP for that, because we are seating tables, and so we want to have a good counting of the number of people who might be able to join us. That's June 4th, Wednesday, June 4th, at Enz's Italian restaurant, just off I-295. Sorry, you folks in Thailand, you won't be able to join us. But next time we're in Thailand, I hope we can go to one of your favorite Italian restaurants.
Send us a doggy bag.
Right. So Romain, how would you like to sum this all up?
Well, I would just end up with few very short sentences and say, okay, we should go from obey and listen to think and do whatever it takes, whatever deals with education or teaching languages. So we got two ways of seeing it, two ways to interpret it. We should really put aside obey and listen, which has no purpose for people in general, except for the few. And we should focus more on think and do. And then if you think, you do, you try, you make mistakes, and then everybody can communicate. And thinking and doing, I think it's in between kindness and logic and everything. I think everybody would do think and do. Everybody can communicate, whatever you speak or nonverbal communication. It just would do the trick.
Okay, thank you. Any final remarks for Romain? Comments, quick ones before we sign
Yes,
off?
quickly, I would like to say I admire polyglots. I have encountered quite a few through my journey around the sun. All walks of life, all different melanin production rates, because we're all one race, the human race. And I've met people from parts of Africa that know Pidgin English, and as well as other languages. I've met people from Belarus. They were some co-workers. They studied languages in thing, and they met up with some other co-workers that they learned Arabic in to me, it seems like 2 weeks. And, they were having conversations. It was just, I admire people. Like I said, I failed Spanish 1 3 times, even though my dad got me the records. I couldn't conjugate a verb to save anybody's life.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your attendance. And Romain, I really appreciate your wisdom, your insights, and your expertise. It's been a great pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation tonight, everybody, for your contributions. And I hope to see you at Enz's next month. And thank you very much. Enjoy. I know it's just morning there. I saw the sun rising behind you. Yeah, right? Yeah. You've got a pretty good spot there, it looks like, right?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's 7 a.m. right now.
Okay. Oh, that's just, oh, yeah, I didn't know that. All right. Well, thank you all, and good night. Thank you, Madeline, for everything you do too. Thanks, everybody.
Merci beaucoup.
Right. Thank you very much. De rien. Merci à tout le monde. Okay, have a good one.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, Steve.